Welcome to my New Year's adventure in Turangi. For the first part of the trip, I decided that I was going to head to the Tongariro Trout Center to have a look around at some of the trout and other native species present in their aquarium. I started off by walking down the stream to have a look at some of the big trout that like to lie in the little pools just below the waterfall. There always seems to be a huge abundance of fish just upstream from the viewing platform. These fish often congregate here to feed on the pellets that people throw in. This big brown at the front looked to be at least 10 pounds based on the roundness of his belly. The underwater viewing chamber is definitely the highlight of the Tongariro Trout Center. There are a ton of big fish waiting to be seen right in front of the glass. Down at the kids' fishing pond, there were a few fish sitting in the current of the outflow. There were also about 1,000 fish waiting in the kids' fishing pond to be caught. Moving inside to the aquarium, I found a bunch of giant cockapoo, something very rarely seen in New Zealand. There's also a small display of wild goldfish and catfish, some of our most invasive species. My favourite of the lot, however, have to be these albino rainbow trout. Roughly 1 in 200,000 fry at the hatchery have this mutation of colour cells. Very cool. The Tongariro Trout Center is one of the few places in New Zealand that still produce rainbow trout in a hatchery. When big enough, these fish will be transferred to the main pond for kids and adults alike to catch. Ironically, the largest fish present at the Tongariro Trout Center aren't even in the main complex. These fish sit just above the walkway as you enter the Trout Center. They get very fat on the extra food that people have left over after walking around the Trout Center. On the morning of New Year's Eve, I headed out onto the lake to test out the reload on some rainbow trout.
You're quite a large fish.
The first fish was a very skinny post-spawner. I searched around looking for signs of the thermocline, but I didn't see much until I got into the shallows. Normally I find fish out in 30 meters, but this time the fish were in shallow on a reef in about 15 meters. I set the drift chute, dropped the jig, and immediately hooked up to a fish. This was the first nicely conditioned fish I'd seen all day, but it was just much too small to keep. Trout, for whatever reason, love to swim straight to the surface as soon as you hook them, so you really need to wind fast to keep the hook in. This fish looks like a better candidate for keeping. Even still, this fish was still on the skinny side, so I thought it'd be best to let him go. another maiden fish, not quite big enough to keep, I'm afraid. Looking back at this clip, it's insane to think just how fast that fish swam from 15 meters up to the surface. At just over 40 centimeters, this fish was perfect for the smoker. I made sure to get the blood out of the fish and onto the ice straight away. Now this fish looks like a much better one. My second fish for the smoker was all sorted. A nice fat 4-pound Taupo rainbow. To get any extra blood out of the fish, I like to run my hands down the lateral line. I caught and released another couple of nice fat rainbows before heading in for the day. In the afternoon, I decided to head down to the Taupo River. There were a number of brown trout present in the shallows, but none of them were keen on feeding. I fished my way through pool to pool, not hitting a fish a single time. I found a few fish hiding just behind these trees. It was a tough drift that required a lot of weight to get down in time.
Hooked one.
Knowing that there were a couple more fish that I hadn't spooked, I cast in again, attempting to get the fly down really deep to these fish.
Yeah. Ah, you're kidding me. Drop the other one.
It seemed like it wasn't going to be my day on the trout. Just round the bend, there was a large brown sitting in the shallows. It's very common that these fish will not even look at any flies. This brown had the fly over his nose about 10 times. I even got the nymph to scratch his nose, and he still wasn't interested.
God, you knew I was there the whole time.
As they often do, the brown calmly swam off, taunting me as he went. I continued on upriver, eventually finding a nice little pocket to cast into. The fly went in blind, and a fish soon picked it up.
Ah! It nearly did me twice, 3 times.
The fish was a beautiful fresh run rainbow hen. It almost destroyed me in the trees 3 times over. After I took the big bomb out of its mouth, it was let go to live another day. Since it was nearing 6 o'clock, I headed out of the river, happy with the one fish that I'd managed to bank. It took a lot of effort, and often those fish are much more rewarding than catching lots. With the weather packing it in on the main lake, I decided to head down to Takanu and have a go at a catfish. The bait of choice was bacon and cheese. The bait was left to waft in the current, hopefully to pick up a catfish's attention. A little while later, the rod loaded up. Since brown bullhead catfish are an invasive species to Lake Taupo, it's required that you kill them and don't return them to the water. Finally, we come to the end of the adventure. It was a fairly chilled out trip in Turangi this year. Didn't catch anything massive, but I thoroughly enjoyed myself all the same. The weather didn't really want to work with me. I'm very happy with how I did, considering the conditions. I'm looking forward to a new year of fishing aboard my reload, and also targeting a few new species. See you out there next time.